and get us started. Thanks again to everybody for joining us. We're really in for a treat tonight. So tonight's May Wild Speaker Series is a glimpse into the Desert Refuge, and we have a really great event planned to actually celebrate the Desert National Wildlife Refuge's 85th birthday, which is today. And I am Grace Palermo. I'll be hosting tonight. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Southern Nevada Programs Director for Friends of Nevada Wilderness. Before we get started, I do want to respectfully acknowledge that the lands we're talking about tonight are the traditional lands of the Nawubi or Southern Paiute people who have stewarded these lands throughout the generations. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and future, and invite you to take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here today. So with that, we are here tonight to talk about the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it was established 85 years ago this day in 1936. So we're wishing a happy birthday to the Desert Refuge. For those who maybe aren't already familiar with this wonderful place, it is just north of Las Vegas and the largest national wildlife refuge outside of Alaska. The Desert Refuge totals 1.6 million acres and includes valleys, mountain ranges, desert woodlands, and coniferous forests. And it's truly teeming with life. It's home to 500 plant species, 320 bird species, and 53 mammal species, of course, including the iconic desert bighorn sheep, which it was initially established to protect their habitat. And visitors who go to the Desert Refuge may hike, camp, watch for wildlife, and, in many ways experience the wonders of these solitary and stunning public lands. So for tonight's presentation, we have two wonderful speakers. First, we'll hear from Kirk Peterson, who is the research coordinator at Friends of Nevada Wilderness. And he will lead us through a photo tour of the Desert Refuge, talking about the different sites that are at the refuge and incredible resources that can be found there. And after that, we'll hear from Kevin DesRoberts, Project Leader for the Desert National Wildlife Refuge Complex. So he will talk to us about management priorities and other updates from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And just so everybody is aware, we are recording so that folks can watch who weren't able to tune in live. So just want to make sure you all know that. And, as we go along, we will do a Q&A session at the end. So you can drop your questions in the chat or comments throughout, and we may be able to address them live, but we'll certainly get to them at the end. And we'd love to hear just kind of what stands out to you, even if you don't have any questions. And so with that, I will pass it off to you, Kirk, to get us started.
Great, thank you, Grace. Once again, I'm Kirk Peterson with Friends of Nevada Wilderness. I'm the research coordinator and just love the desert and love the refuge. So let me take the screen here and we'll get started.
Oh, yeah. It looks like you're on mute, Kirk.
Okay, we're going to be looking at the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. And of course, the first place to check out would be the Visitor Center. We'll find out a little bit more when that will be reopened, but it's a great place. It's about 11 miles from Vegas. So if you're down there, make sure that you get out there to do that. I am not sure why this is not, we did this earlier and it was advancing. I'm not sure what's going on right now. There we go. That's weird. So this is the Desert National Wildlife Refuge, and I really can't resist putting a bit more history in here for you. Initially, when the Desert National Wildlife Refuge was created, it was the Desert Game Range, and it was over 2 million acres. And that included what we see here for the most part, and then all the way down to include most of Mount Charleston and most of Red Rock. And it wasn't until 1966 that they officially pushed it back beyond 95 to the shape we know today. That was about 600,000 acres down here was dropped. But fortunately, most of that's under some sort of conservation protection today, which is pretty awesome. So the first place we're going to look at is down here, just outside the visitor center to the north. I don't know if you see my arrow, I'm kind of using it as a pointer, but along the Alamo Road, take a look at the Joe May Trail area, the Hidden Forest area, and then up to Quijinum. And I would appreciate if anybody knew a better way to pronounce that canyon, which is kind of an awesome, very remote canyon to go that leads up into the high peaks. So let's get started. So one of the things about the desert and the Desert Refuge and the desert in general is this is a quote I came across just today. And the desert tells a different story every time one ventures into it. And for those of you who are desert rats, I know you know this already, but yeah, getting out into the desert, just sitting there, watching the day change into night, waiting to see what happens tomorrow. Every time you go out, it's a different story. This is down in that southwest corner of the refuge. And actually you can look at that directly behind Grace right now. It's her, behind her screen. This was a spring break down there on that kind of the Joe May area that was done in ASB alternate spring break that Friends of Nevada Wilderness does. And I brought this image up just to show you how drastically things can change in the desert at certain times of the year. This was a very pleasant evening. People are eating dinner, sitting out, people are in short sleeves. And the next morning, this is what they found. But it snowed. It definitely does snow down here in this region. There's, and depending on when and how hard those storms come in, they can be pretty substantial in bringing a lot of snow down into the lower valley areas. And this is also for the ultimate spring break down in that same area. And a couple of things I wanted to point out. We do a lot of stuff with Friends with the Dark Sky. And this is a great shot. I think Kirk Nikki took it. And we're seeing the stars. We're seeing some smeared clouds up there because it's a little bit of a timed exposure. But the light in the left-hand corner is up at probably the military training area around Indian Springs, I believe it is. And but what is really interesting is this beautiful light on the mountain on the south end of the Sheep Range, and that is Vegas sky glow, acting as a big fill light so you can actually see the details on the mountain. One of the really interesting areas in that southern part of the range on the west side is the Dead Man Canyon Trail, which goes up to Hidden Forest. It starts once again at the kind of up at the top of the alluvial fans. You start in an environment of primarily Joshua trees and the Mojave material plant community. And as you start coming up the canyon, very quickly you move up into the Pinyon Pine Forest area. And the canyon starts narrowing up and it becomes much more rugged. The beautiful limestones come out on the walls. And when I did this, there was still snow on the ground up in the upper part of the canyon. The trees are getting much larger, and finally you reach a point where you're dealing with Ponderosa Pines, and this is a Hidden Forest basin up in that part of the range. One of the other things that I was really surprised to see, although I did know that they were up there, but to be hiking from the desert up into the snow, which you can see, and then finding a tree like this one right here, which is we're into fir trees, and finding fir trees, you know, within an hour and a half of walking of Joshua trees, I thought was pretty amazing. And that's, I think, one of the things that really pops out about the Desert Refuge. And up in Hidden Forest is this cabin. It's something that the Fish and Wildlife Service takes care of, and we also help them with projects in keeping it in shape, keeping it open for people. But if you continue up, this is an access to the upper canyon. And one of the things I wanted to do is, this is probably the oldest picture I've got in my presentation. This is 1956, and it's from an annual report that was written for 1955 for the refuge. And it's interesting, it says that they completed 15 miles of horse trail along the Sheep Mountain Ridge, and many additional miles have been surveyed. The trail is designed to tie in with our system of roads and will provide better and more systematic coverage of the area. What's really interesting is most people I've talked to have no idea that there was a trail up there, or still, I mean, they built it. There's probably some remnants of that up there as well. So be interesting to go up and see if you can track that down. So this next series of photos were taken by Howard Booth, and he actually donated a lot of his photographs to friends to use. So and all these were slides that have been scanned. So it's kind of interesting. This is this very interesting remote canyon just north of Hidden Forest Canyon, or Dead Man Canyon. Again, beautiful limestone walls. Start getting up very quickly into the trees, and fir trees clustering to the walls. As you get higher, you get up into the steeper canyons, and it does become quite a bit more difficult, as you can see here. You start getting up into cliff country. So there's no trail up this canyon, but it's a great place to explore if you've got the skills and talent for doing that. And eventually you get up and you're up into Bristlecone Pines, which we've got right over here, and you can see them up in this area. We're also at this point looking out to the west, and this is over the rest of the Desert Refuge, which is in the military area. Again, these slides were taken back in the 70s. This is looking north toward the north end of the Sheep Range up in here. This is Desert Lake, and the sand dunes we'll be looking at later. The Hole and Rock area is back up over in here. So we'll be looking at that a little bit more detail. And of course, you get high enough and you will find Bristlecone, the traditional windswept, eroded Bristlecone. This is a 1972 photo by Howard Booth, looking south on the range into the higher peaks of the Sheep Range. And just because we've got photos from the 70s, I thought I'd throw this one in so we could make fun of the clothes that we wore when we hiked, including some of the classic things like berets, a net undershirt, very, very short shorts, and of course, the external Kelty frames. So, and of course, it's a sheep range, so you're liable to run into Bighorn sheep up there, everything from ewes to full-size rams. The next section we're going to look at is just north of this area. The area we looked at was down in this part, down the southwest corner. Up, we're going to look at a little bit looking at the East Desert Range, Dead Horse Trail, and then the Cabin Springs Road area. The Sheep Range is very interesting because it starts as a very broad range and then it stretches out into a very long, narrow range with spectacular limestone cliffs. And but the first thing you'll notice is the military. The pink here is the military boundary. And it's interesting, part of the road actually goes through the military. And if you drive that section of the road on the Alamo Road, there are signs on both sides saying, do not leave the road. You're in a military reservation. So let's get to looking at this area. There you go. Basically, we've got the military signs all over the place along the side of the road. And any track that had been off in that direction has been closed for years. And this, I just put this slide in. Again, this is one of Howard Booth's slides from the 70s, looking out over that western part of the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. And this is pretty much everything you see out there beyond the foothills and the bottom of that alluvial fan is in the military. This is the oldest Howard Booth slide I have, which is from 1969. And again, almost everything we're seeing out there is the military parts of the Desert Wildlife Refuge. If we move a little bit further up, we get into the Dead Horse Trail area. And this area is very interesting because it's up higher elevation. You've got a wonderful mix of Joshua trees and pinyon and juniper. And also it gives you a really good view. You're looking south into the higher peaks of the Sheep Range. Great places to camp up here, just beautiful scenic country. And that's what's behind us is where the Sheep Range steps over to the east and becomes a very long, narrow range of beautiful limestone cliffs. And a great place to watch sunsets. If you continue up Dead Horse Trail, the trail becomes very interesting, finding your way through the maze of limestone. And if we get up further, this is accessible actually from the Desert Lake area, where you've got a road that comes back down south, and this brings you into Cabin Springs. Another very remote area, but with incredible views looking back toward the west, especially in the morning. This is morning light, and this is the East Desert Range, and that is within the public access area. So there's a lot of interesting exploration here. I haven't spent a lot of time in there, but that would be it's really high on my list to get back in there and explore that region. And beautiful sunsets in this place. I know I put these huge panoramas on. If you're watching on a small device, you're not going to be able to see anything, but I just can't resist because this is that East Desert Range from the Cabin Springs area. I thought I'd take a moment to just run through a bunch of the wildflowers that are out there. And again, the desert's such an amazing place because it waits. It waits for decades sometimes for the water to hit just right at the right season to produce some incredible blooms. And as you can tell from these pictures, a lot of them were taken when it was overcast, probably in late winter, very, very early spring. And these are one of the agaves that grow down in this area, which was a very important food for the indigenous people who lived and survived in this area. I believe this is the indigo bush. If anybody has a better, yeah, thank you. Someone agreed. That's good. One of the most amazing plants. I mean, the color of purple in that is just unbelievable, even on overcast days. Okay, this next section we're going to look at is down here following the Mormon Well Road up to Mormon Pass and then down to Sawmill Canyon and then out across the north end of the Las Vegas range and just kind of get a feel for what that country's like. As you start up that road, you get some great views back to Mount Charleston over the very farthest northern or southern part of the sheep range. This is one of the many agave roasting pits that are found throughout the refuge, which it's amazing that some of the largest agave roasting pits that a lot of people have ever seen are out there. This area is very definitely important, has been actually, you know, with Dooley Springs and even Gypsum Cave down there, they've got habitation sites that date in excess of 11,000 years. So this area was a really important crossroads for many different people for hundreds of generations. I think someone gave that the name Shaman Cave. I'm not quite sure what that means, but it's on that wall as well. This is the Peekaboo Canyon along the Mormon Well Road. And once you get up to the top of the Mormon Well Pass, you run into a wonderful grove of Ponderosa Pine. This is also the site of the Desert View Campground, which is at almost 7,000 feet, which makes it quite comfortable for all but the hottest summer days. And in the shoulder seasons, that road is often closed, or even in the winter it's closed because of snow, and it can be treacherous with the snow on the ground and on the road. As we start coming down the east side, or actually we're heading straight north off of Mormon Pass, we come to Salomon Canyon, which is a great access to get back up into the west or the east side of the sheep range. Again, Ponderosa Pines. Actually, right before you get down to where the Salomon Canyon splits off, you get into a really interesting area of some of the largest Joshua trees I've ever seen. They're not really bulky, but they're very tall. It's like they're competing with the juniper to try to, or the pinyon pine, to try to get tall enough to get the light. It's like this fierce competition. It's really pretty amazing place. And up in Sawmill Canyon, there's remnants of the sawmill operation that went on there. And I particularly like this vehicle that is sitting up in that canyon. These are Howard Booth's photos. He took them in 2000. Don't ask me where this is. I do not know, but I would love to stumble across that. And once you get up into the upper end of Sawmill Canyon, it does give you access up to the higher peaks. And again, find snow up there. It gets pretty deep at certain times of the year. As we head due east and follow Sawmill Canyon back down through the Las Vegas range, it cuts some beautiful little canyon structures through the limestones. Get down into the yucca forest as you move down toward the bottom, and a lot of that alluvial surface is full of Joshua trees. There's a site in there. It's the first time I really saw this in Nevada, but that east side of the Las Vegas range experienced a fairly intense wildfire that burned up a lot of Joshua trees. And unfortunately, now that's kind of becoming a thing. I think Sema Dome burnt a couple of years ago, which was terrible. It was, I mean, that was such a dense Joshua tree forest, and it's all blackened now. Definitely climate's changing. Some of these forests are now coming at risk. Looking back at the Las Vegas range and then the sheep range behind it. Wonderful limestone formations as we get down lower. And fossils. And this is looking up toward that northern end of the sheep range, where this is like the tail end of the Las Vegas range. And then beyond it is that long, narrow section of the sheep range stretching up toward Pahranagat. And looking due east, out around the corner of that's Arrow Creek Range, I believe. Yeah, the Arrow Creek Wilderness. And again, one of my long landscapes that probably doesn't show up on a small device, so I won't spend too much time there. There are also a lot of petroglyphs in the Desert National Wildlife Refuge, and you can see them in the shadows here. I don't know where they are. I haven't been to them, and I'm not going to tell you where they are, but I do have pictures of them, so I'll show you some of those. And it's really important to protect these sites, and the less people know where they are, the more we can protect them. Pretty amazing sites. And of course, the main animal you see on there is bighorn sheep. There's also pictographs, some of the painted work in the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. This last section we're going to look at is up here in the north. It's the Hole in Rock Wilderness area, and one of my favorite areas, the Desert Lake and the dune system. The Hole in Rock area it's got some really great little formations. So it's a fairly dry place with a lot more, it's got a lot more rhyolite mixed in with it, which leaves a lot of different shaped cliffs and rocks and makes a great contrast to the limestones we see further south. This may or may not be the Hole in Rock. It's a pretty awesome feature, but I mean, just finding a huge boulder with a hole like that in the bottom is pretty amazing. It's even more amazing to look through it and use it as a framing device for the north end of the sheep range. Again, this is those rhyolite formations looking south toward the sheep range. And Desert Lake is right over that hill and down. More of that rhyolite, and that's the Desert Lake. And the dunes are right around the corner. Another one of my landscapes photos. Gotta love sand dunes. I mean, to me, it's one of the things I love the most about the desert. I always get really excited when I see what I call free sand that's still moving and living and working. And you can tell by the system of ripples across the top and the lack of vegetation that these are still active. These are most likely an echo type dune that have formed at the edge of the valley where the winds sweep the sand off of the Desert Lake area. And then as they approach the mountains, the wind slows down and it drops the dunes before the mountains. So they're set back from the mountains, which is why they call them echoes, because they're ways away from the mountain. And if you really want to see people act like children, take them out to the sand dunes. Just can't resist. It's like having the best playground in the world. And as I started this presentation talking about how the desert always has something different to show and tell, it's like you can spend hours in the sand dunes just watching the play of light. And this great sand still moving, encroaching some of the vegetation, exposing other vegetation. This is desert rice grass, another one of my favorite desert plants. Yeah, you have to let me indulge in looking at desert sand dunes. That's the northern end of the sheep range, and then the higher part of the sheep range is in the background with Hayford Peak and the 9,000, nearly 10,000 foot peaks wrapped in clouds and snow. And if you're into abstract photography, go visit a sand dune system. And of course, there's nothing like sunset on the Desert Refuge. I know, another very long horizontal shot, but it just kind of puts it all together. A lot of different photographers went into this site, or for me to put this little presentation together. I just wanted to make sure I thank those folks, and that's it.
Thank you, Kirk. It was really cool to see those slides from Howard Booth, and I just love how the Desert Refuge spans from those creosote plant communities to Joshua trees all the way up to Bristlecone pines. It's a spectacularly diverse area. Before we move to the next section, we did have one question from Josh who asks, let's see, where is it? What type of camera and lenses do you prefer to shoot with, Kirk?
Well, that goes back to the 1970s when people were wearing all those funny clothes. In 1979, I picked up a Pentax camera system because the same interchangeable lenses as a bunch of other different cameras, and it just made me think that, wow, that's something I should really invest in. So I had quite a collection of Pentax lenses. So I waited forever before Pentax came out with a digital camera, and I picked one up in the early 2000s, and I've been slowly stair-stepping up. Right now I'm shooting a full format Pentax, and the most heartbreaking thing is I had great lenses for film. They don't hold up for today's digital. So I had to go back and buy new lenses. So yeah, the full format cameras, nobody's made it. Even the old film lenses can't touch the resolution that's required to bring out all the detail in there. In fact, some of those photos, if you may have noticed, I noticed because I'm very critical of my own work, but one of my favorite lenses I used with my film camera was a great 28mm lens, and it just doesn't hold focus for the digital camera. So there's just a little bit of softness on the edge. So that's what I use.
All right, thank you, Kirk. So I think I saw your comment there, Kevin. I'm still seeing everyone moving, so hopefully your screen is not frozen. But if you want to take off your camera, we will move on to your portion of the event, or if you need to log back in, that is okay too. And we did get one question. That's of the 6 spur roads off of Alamo Road going east into the Sheep Mountains. Do you have any preferences? So I will let you answer that one, Kirk.
I have to always give my standard answer when people ask what my favorite one is. It's always the last one I drove up. Just as my favorite area in Nevada is always the last one I visited. So, I mean, they're amazing. And like I said, every time you go up, they're different. That's all I can say. They're all worth visiting, and there's a bunch I haven't seen yet that I hope to get back to see.
Absolutely. Yeah, it looks like Kevin will be logging out and then re-entering. So we will wait for him for a moment. But you know, I think one of my preferences for those roads personally is actually the Dead Horse Road. You know, it's pretty far up in the middle of the Alamo Road, so you don't see a whole lot of people out there. And it's a little higher elevation, so nice and cooler spot to go. And yeah, I really like that solitude that can be found up there. And we have another question from Harold, which is where those great sand dunes exactly are. So I don't know if you want to take that one, Kirk, or I'm happy to as well.
Well, I can start, and you can kind of correct it. You are much more of an expert on this than I am. I mean, I have to visit it from Reno, so I'm very envious we don't have something wonderful like the Desert Refuge right outside of Reno that we could go out and visit. You guys are so lucky down there. They are out the Alamo Road, just off of the Desert Lake. It's interesting because I think and please jump in, Grace, but I think coming in from the south can actually be a little bit problematic because sometimes the sand can drift across the road and make the road pretty difficult to get through. I think coming in from the north is always a better bet. I'll just throw that in. So.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the best route there to take is coming from the north through actually Pahranagat National Wildlife Refuge for that exact reason. Crossing that dry lake is pretty risky.
Yeah. And when I went through, it was fortunately in the wet season, so that really helps solidify some of the sand, keeps it from blowing out from underneath your vehicle.
Perfect. And it looks like Kevin is back in, so I'm going to give him a moment here. But we got another question, which is awesome. Thank you, everybody. And that is the road from Pahranagat still closed? And I am quite positive that that is open. So you kind of go in by going by the visitor center by Pahranagat and follow Alamo Road down.
I know there's a closed sign on that road, but I think it's the visitor facilities are all closed. I think that's what that.
Yes, Alamo Road has been closed because of all the construction for the new access to the refuge headquarters and visitor center, and the installation of the acceleration and deacceleration lanes off of Highway 93. So and I think it's still closed because they'll be done soon. But you can access it through Metzger Pass Road if you come around the other side, and that road's in pretty good shape. I used it back in, I think it was April, and it was fine. It was easy to travel on. So yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. And with that, excellent timing. We will pass it along to you to share some updates from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
All right, thank you, Grace, and thank you, Kirk. That was wonderful, taking us on that journey through the refuge. That was pretty awesome, so thank you so much. And thank you, Grace, for inviting me to speak tonight, and for all the Friends of Mountain Wilderness members. This is wonderful, and I appreciate that you're doing this. So, and as we know, today is a very special occasion for Desert Wildlife Refuge with 85th birthday, and this one is really significant, as we all know, because the refuge is still intact. Thanks to the efforts of Friends of Mountain Wilderness and numerous partners, a diverse coalition of people, and the leadership of Jose Witt and Sharon Netherton and so many others that basically enabled the protection of the refuge and preventing the expansion of the Nevada Test and Training Range onto the refuge. So this is a pretty major accomplishment, and especially with protecting the refuge in the long term. So thank you all so much. It's amazing. I can tell you, to see it happen over the last several years has been incredibly inspirational and encouraging to see, people really stepped up and fought for the refuge, and it paid off. So thank you all very much. So I won't take too much time. I'll make sure there's time for questions, and I don't want to bore you with my voice because I don't have any pictures. So just a couple updates. As most folks know, with the passage of the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act, that was a status quo withdrawal renewal for the Nevada Test and Training Range. So there's a couple things that were included that have changed, and that is the establishment of a Intergovernmental Executive Committee by Department of Defense and Department of Interior, and hopefully that should be starting sometime later this year and should enable more engagement in the overall oversight on the entire range, 3 million acre range by the states, by the agencies, and by the tribes, which is very, very important. And then also it requires an interagency committee between Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. Air Force, and updating the MOU. So I'll keep you posted on that. That's just getting started. Nothing has really happened that much yet. So I'll keep folks updated on that. So, and very important, as Grace mentioned, the Desert Range or Wildlife Refuge is within the ancestral homeland of the Nuuvi people, the Southern Paiute and Chemehuevi people. And this place is very, very special and very important to them. And we work very closely with the tribes. As many of you know, a lot of the visitor center exhibits were done in collaboration with the tribes. We had working groups for each of the refuges to make sure we included, their perspectives, their voices, their stories, and their connections to the land, to help people really understand and appreciate the land in different ways. So, and that partnership continues. And also, one thing we've been doing with the Forest Service and other partners is hosting an annual gathering for New Woolley people to kind of reconnect them to Mount Charleston in particular, especially the younger people, reconnecting them to their ancestral lands and some of those traditions. So, and that collaboration continues. And Friends has been very helpful in some of these events and connecting, tribal folks back to the ancestral land. So thank you for that as well. So Grace wanted me to mention a personal story. So one thing I want to share, it's really kind of cool. As Kirk mentioned, every time you go out into the refuge, there's always different experiences. It's amazing. It's absolutely incredible. Whether it's different times of year, the light, the wildlife, the flowers, it's just a phenomenal place that's different every time you go out. So one thing I've been doing since 2009 is called a breeding bird survey. There's a route that is on Desert Refuge, and breeding bird surveys are one of the oldest wildlife surveys in North America. It started in 1966, and it entails stopping every half a mile in a 3-minute time period, counting every bird you can see within a quarter of a mile. So the route on Desert starts at the intersection of Cabin Spring Road and Alamo Road. So right there at the south end of Desert Dry Lake, and then comes 24 and a half miles south. So it's a really cool area. And so every time I go out to do it, I go out the night before. And then I camp out and just sleep on a cot under the stars the night before, which is just incredible. As Kurt showed, the night skies are just phenomenal on the refuge. And when it's warm, especially end of May, early June, you can sleep just out without a tent or anything. And it's just phenomenal to see the Milky Way and just all the stars and the planets. It's just incredible. And then to do that survey the next morning is just magical. As the landscape comes alive, birds start singing and moving. And then one year in particular, I was very fortunate on my way out during the evening before, I got to see 7 bighorn sheep rams as they were crossing from the sheep range to the west into the East Desert Range. And that was just amazing. I've never seen that many sheep on the refuge at one time since then. I've only seen a lamb or ewe here and there and a couple individuals, but that was pretty impressive. So that was pretty neat. So I will continue on from there so I don't bore you too much. Just some updates. If folks don't know, Refuge Manager Amy Sprunger, who's been here for 20 years, is going to be retiring in the end of June. So we got a major transition that will be happening with management of the refuge. So we'll be trying to backfill that position as soon as possible. And in the meantime, the Deputy Project Leader, Krista Weiss, will be acting in that capacity until we can fill it. Hopefully it'll be advertised and get it filled by next year. And also we've got some newer staff on the refuge that some of you may have not met, especially with the pandemic. We haven't seen many people face to face. June Chu is the wildlife biologist, and she started in March of last year. So she's one of our pandemic cohorts who started during the pandemic and has done a great job getting her feet on the ground and helping out and getting things going and picking up and where things were, just helping out with everything going on and helping Amy transition. And then also we have Chuck Oswick. He's the maintenance mechanic, and he started in January of this year. And Chuck has jumped right in and is doing a great job for us. So hopefully we'll get to meet some of these folks in the future. And with visitation and resource protection, I know a lot of folks heard about this, and we experienced it throughout the public lands in Nevada and beyond, is the pandemic resulted in a huge increase in visitation, which was good because it exposed a lot of new people to public lands, including the Desert Wildlife Refuge, but also we incurred a lot of damage. We had a lot of people coming out who had no experience going outside and recreating and having to do it responsibly and being good stewards. So there was quite a bit of damage to some of the resources, especially close to roads and pullouts and things like that. So there's a lot of remediation that needs to be done, and Friends of Meadow Wilderness have already started helping out with that. A few weeks ago, they did a project with NIT that Peter led out here to put up post and cable around one of the pullouts up by Gas Peak Road and Mornwell Road to try to contain people into camping in one area and not increasing their impact. So we're going to need more of that to continue, but thank you for that help as well, because as you know, we depend a lot on volunteers, and Friends provides a lot of assistance with that. So let me take a drink really quick. My mouth is dry. It's very windy and dusty out here today, so I apologize. And a couple other things, the visitor center. So everybody's wondering about when we're going to be able to open the visitor center. So working with Jennifer Hurrow and her staff to try to see if we have enough volunteers to possibly open the visitor center sometime later this summer, especially with Nevada going to full open come June 1st with no restrictions on occupancy and masks and everything. We're going to attempt to try to reopen the visitor center if we have enough people to do it. So now I mentioned, if you're interested in volunteering out at Desert, especially helping with the visitor center, we can always use the help. So one of the things that we're dealing with right now is still this restriction that the Office of Management and Budget has in place for the federal government, which is 25% capacity of federal facilities. So we're hoping that will be relaxed as the CDC guidelines have been relaxed in these last couple of days and last week, because that'll help us, because it'd be really hard to keep the capacity of the visitor center at 25%. To manage that would be kind of crazy, and especially with no one else doing it in the state, it's hard to justify it, and for people to understand that. It's going to be very frustrating for people. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully we'll be able to do that in the next couple months, and we'll let you know. But we're making some progress. And in the meantime, we've been very fortunate. We've had volunteers that have been staffing information tables outside and interacting with the visitors, and also roving in the backcountry, roving trails, and helping a lot of folks learn about the refuge, because there's still a lot of new people coming out, and learning about all the cool things, all the cool places to see, and how to do it responsibly. And that's been very, very important. So thank you for all who've been doing that. And I think that's all I have for major updates. So I want to save some time for questions. Oh, somebody asked, are dogs allowed on the refuge? So yes, but they must be on a leash. So I know in the backcountry, you'll find people will hike with them off leash, but they're supposed to be on a leash, and that's to prevent disturbance to other wildlife. So yes, they are allowed, but make sure you clean up after your dog. So.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, and if anybody has any questions, either here on Zoom or on the Facebook stream, please throw those in the chat. We'd love to answer them. This is a really good opportunity to do that. We did have one question while you were coming back in, Kevin, that you might want to answer. That is, of the 6 spur roads off of Alamo going east into the Sheep Mountains, do you have any preferences?
Oh, it's probably Dead Man Canyon. Yeah. Dead Horse is nice too. That's pretty cool back in there. Yeah.
Agreed.
They're all really good.
Yeah. Yes, Dead Horse was also my selection. All right, looks like we have a question from Jenny. How are the roads maintained, such as how frequent is grading?
So this is one of the challenges, especially the position was vacant for almost a year between when we lost Jack and we got Chuck on board. So there was definitely a lag time between any grading. And then we had some volunteers that were able to help this past winter. But one of the key things that is essential to be able to grade these roads, because they're very, very difficult, very rocky, very rough, is to get some moisture. And we know this past year, there's been very little to no moisture. This is one of the driest years on record. It's unbelievable. So it takes moisture to get some of that grading done. I know Chuck was able to grade a little bit with some of the showers we got a couple weeks ago. He just did part of Morton Well Road up to, I think, Gas Peak. But yeah, it's very, very difficult, and it takes a lot of time. It's hard to equip it, and we have one person that can do it right now. So yeah, so I ask folks just to be patient, because it's a challenge. So, but we do the best we can with the folks we have. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I believe that Dead Horse Road was washed out a year or two ago. Has that road been graded since then?
Yes, that's been repaired and graded. That was by our 2 wonderful volunteers, Mark Ackerman and Joyce Atkins. they pretty much took care of that along with some other volunteers. I think Rod Colvin came home from Ash Meadows. So yeah, they took care of that and got that repaired. So yeah.
That's fantastic. We have a great comment from Scott, which is congrats to Ranger Josh for hosting Sarah Woolman of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge on Art in the System. That was a really cool presentation, I have to agree. And if you want to still look at it but haven't had a chance, you can find it on our YouTube page. So I definitely recommend that one. All right, and we have a question from Heidi on Facebook who asks, are there any major wetlands in the refuge?
So that's a good question. Because folks may or may not know, the only perennial stream is at Corn Creek. That's where one of our major springs and outflows occurs on the entire refuge. So it's very, very critical. It provides riparian habitat for a lot of species of wildlife. It's such an important place. But then the rest of the refuge, there's a lot of smaller springs that are up in various ranges. So, but that's about it. We are very limited on wetlands. So it's a very dry refuge. So, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
This is John Hyatt. I have a couple of comments actually. One time a number of years ago, I was hiking above Sawmill Spring in the hills there, and I came across a man-made trail. It was obvious a man-made trail. You could see where they'd cut logs and so on. And I've asked people about it, and nobody ever had any idea what it was. They thought maybe it was done when the Forest Service was controlling that land. So I was really interested to hear what Kirk had to say, that there actually was a trail up there. And that was probably the one that I came across, I'm sure. The other thing, you mentioned Shaman Cave. About 25 years ago, when Ken Vogt was in charge there, some people came into his office and they said, just kind of like to show you this article we're planning on publishing in a British climbing magazine about Shaman Cave as an extreme climbing location. I do not want to see them. Okay. And they went up and looked, and at that time when you drove by there were always cars parked on the main road, people going over there, and there were dozens and dozens of permanent anchors installed in the roof of that cave, thousands of dollars worth of hardware. And finally, the service just said, you know, you guys can remove that stuff or we're going to remove it for you. And that happened. And basically, it's no longer a attractive climbing spot, but for a while, you'd go up there and you'd see cars with all different out-of-state plates on it, so on. It was a huge attraction for a while. People climbing on the roof of the cave.
Yeah, thank you, John, for sharing that. I did not personally know that situation with Shaman Cave, and also thought that picture you shared, Kirk, and the story behind that trail was really interesting.
And the other thing,
a couple more questions.
Just one more comment.
Go ahead, John.
That truck, that's up near Perkins Spring off of the Sawmill Canyon Road. When you get up to where the old sawmill was, if you turn right and take that branch up there, you'll find that truck. And I think there's another one too that had solid rubber tires.
Wow.
What's really interesting there is that sawmill was only equipped to cut a certain size of log. And so it couldn't cut big ones, and they didn't want small ones. So they only cut ones that were about 18 to 20 inches in diameter. So fortunately, they weren't able to clear cut it or cut all of Ponderosa, which is what they would have done if they'd had a sawmill with greater versatility.
Oh, I am thankful for that. We have a couple more questions that I want to make sure we get to, and then we will probably wrap up pretty shortly here. The next question we had was from Fred, who asks, given the drought, what are the conditions of the guzzlers? Enough water for them? So
yeah, that's a good question, because of this drought, a lot of guzzlers are at very low capacity. I don't know if folks are aware, but last October, Nevada Department of Wildlife had to shuttle water or carry water into several guzzlers because they were going dry last year, especially on the west side of the refuge within the Nevada Test and Training Range, as well as a lot of other areas throughout Nevada. So the way things are going right now, they're probably gonna have to do that again. I know the staff here have been working with NDOW staff to go out and check guzzlers that we can hike into to see what their capacity is so they can strategically select which ones they need to haul water to. But yeah, it's likely they're going to have to do it. Even if there's a good monsoon season, that's not coming till July or August. So, and as we all know, June can be very, very hot, and these sheep are dependent on these water sources during the summertime. So they'll probably have to haul some water. Yeah.
While we're on this topic, Eric asks, what is a guzzler?
So a guzzler is also called a water development, and this is a structure that collects precipitation. It's usually a metal curtain or fabric that is on the ground where water is collected from rain or snow melt, and then that water runs down into a collection basin, and then is piped to storage tanks. And then what usually is connected to the storage tank is a drinker that's on type float system or a gravity feed system. So animals have access to the water over a long period of time. So yeah, that's basically what a guzzler is.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, those are incredibly important for our wildlife out here. And we have one last question at the moment from Jim, who asks, what type of training do you need to volunteer at the visitor center?
You have to check out, get a hold of Josh, Josh Contois. He's there's a book on the desk called The Tome of Knowledge, I think, that people have to learn and as part of their orientation to work at the visitor center. So, but yeah, he can provide the details on what those requirements are. But yeah, yep.
Perfect. I will follow up with you, Jim, and make sure that you get Josh's contact information, because I'm sure they would love some help with that, and are excited that you're interested.
So one thing I do want to,
go ahead,
Grace,
yeah.
I just want to, kind of in closing, I just want to encourage people, folks who are able to get up there and maybe haven't had the opportunity yet, is if you're able to get up to Hayford Peak, I say do it. Because it is just an incredible place. You're like in the center of the refuge, and it's the only place you can see all of it. It's unbelievable. You can see all the refuge and beyond. It gives you a really good landscape perspective of the whole refuge and the surrounding public lands, and it's just a phenomenal view up there. And then with the habitats up there, with the, especially all the way to Bristlecone, it's just phenomenal, and associated wildlife. So I encourage people to do that. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's a spring on the way up there, which is, for us in the desert, always really exciting to see some water, at least in my opinion. Yes, you are welcome, Almendra, for the suggestions. And Kirk, did you want to say anything to kind of close out?
No, just the desert is an amazing place, and there is a great series of maps if you just love exploring and doing things without following a trail. And these guys that come out of the available to visitor center, first thing I did was pick up both of those. I would recommend never unfolding them while you're driving, because they take up they are very detailed. They give you a lot of information about places to explore. There's plenty of exploring off trail if you have the skills, knowledge, and ability to do that.
Absolutely. Well, excellent. On that note, we will close it out for the evening. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you really enjoyed the speaker series tonight, and that you took this as a good way, or find another to wish a happy birthday to the Desert Refuge. It's a really incredible place, and we're so glad that it's been there as a refuge for the bighorn sheep for 85 years now. As well, of course, the Wild Speaker Series is a series, and so you can join us again in 2 weeks for the next one. And our team will be talking all about trails. So you can hear current conditions on trails throughout the state, including accomplishments and places that our trail crews have worked at, what goes into creating some of those trail maps, and some other volunteer opportunities on trails. So we hope to see you all there, and thank you for joining us. Have a good evening.